You know, sometimes in history, you come across a story that just stops you in your tracks. A story that doesn't quite fit. It's a paradox that forces you to question everything you think you know about a person or an event. And the story we're looking at today is perhaps one of the most profound and deeply unsettling of them all. It's a story that takes us right into the heart of darkness, only to find a single, inexplicable flicker of light.
If all Jews were like him, there would be no Jewish question. Just let that sink in for a moment. The words themselves are chilling enough. But when you find out who said them, well, it takes on a whole new dimension of horror. The author of that sentence was Adolf Hitler. And he was talking about his family's Jewish doctor, a man named Eduard Bloch. That one sentence contains a contradiction so massive, it's honestly hard to wrap your head around.
So that's the central mystery we're going to investigate. How does that happen? How could the man responsible for the systematic murder of millions of Jews make a specific, personal exception for one? To even begin to find an answer, we have to unravel a deeply personal story. A story about kindness and grief and a debt. And let's be absolutely clear, this isn't about finding an excuse for a monster. Far from it. This is about understanding the true, chilling nature of his choices.
To get to the bottom of this, we have to go back. Way back. Our story doesn't begin in the halls of power in Berlin, not in the 1930s or 40s. No, we have to travel back more than 30 years, to 1907, in the small provincial Austrian city of Linz. Because it was here, in a crucible of poverty, sickness, and terrible grief, that a bond was formed. A bond that would somehow impossibly endure.
So picture it, Linz, Austria in 1907. The Hitler family, well, they were poor, really struggling, living on the edge with a very little. And their family doctor was a man named Eduard Bloch. By all accounts, Dr. Bloch was a truly good man, the kind of doctor they called an Armenarzt, a doctor for the poor. He was known throughout the city for treating anyone who needed help, regardless of whether they could afford to pay him or not.
And into this already difficult family situation comes a tragedy. Clara Hitler, Adolf's mother, who he absolutely adored, was diagnosed with breast cancer. The prognosis was terrible, and the only treatment available at the time was just brutal. It involved a chemical called iodoform, which was applied directly to the tumor to essentially burn it away. The pain was constant, and it was agonizing, a daily, unrelenting torment.
And watching all of this, every single day, was Clara's 18-year-old son, Adolf. It's so important to try and see him as he was then, not as the monster he would become. He was a quiet, aspiring artist, and he was completely devoted to his mother. He effectively became her nurse. He cooked the meals, he cleaned the house, and for weeks on end, he slept on a little mat on the floor right next to her bed, just so he could be there for her.
When Clara finally passed away in December 1907, Dr. Bloch was there. And years later, after the whole world knew who Hitler was, Dr. Bloch wrote about that moment, and what he wrote is just stunning. He said, "In all my career, I have never seen anyone so prostrate with grief as Adolf Hitler." Think about that. A doctor has seen countless people lose their loved ones, and it was this one boy's grief, this 18-year-old sorrow, that stood out to him more than any other.
And then there was the financial side of it. Clara's illness had been long, and the treatment was expensive. The family had no way to pay the full bill. But Dr. Bloch, knowing they had almost nothing, just waived most of it. For months of difficult treatment and countless late-night house calls, he charged them only a tiny fraction of the cost. It was an act of pure compassion.
A little while after the funeral, young Adolf Hitler went to see Dr. Bloch to thank him. He looked him in the eye, shook his hand, and he made a solemn promise. He said, "I shall be grateful to you forever." It was the earnest vow of a heartbroken teenager. But that promise, made in a moment of profound gratitude, would echo down through the decades in the most unbelievable way imaginable. All right, now we jump forward 31 years. The world has been turned completely upside down. That grieving teenager from Linz is no longer a teenager. He is the absolute dictator of Nazi Germany. And his hateful ideology is about to swallow his own homeland, Austria. And, with it, the life of the very man he promised to be grateful to forever. The connection didn't just vanish right away. The next year, in 1908, Hitler sent Dr. Bloch a hand-painted postcard to thank him again. But then, there was silence. For 3 long decades. Until March of 1938, the Anschluss. German troops march into Austria. And for the hundreds of thousands of Jewish citizens there, including Dr. Bloch, the nightmare began overnight. Now you have to understand the jarring contrast here.
For the general Jewish population of Austria, the Nazi takeover was an instant catastrophe. Synagogues burned, shops were looted, passports were stamped with a giant red J, property seized, phones disconnected. But for Dr. Eduard Bloch, the experience was surreal. The Gestapo did come to his door, but they weren't there to arrest him. They were there to inform him that he was now under their special protection. He got to keep his apartment, his passport, his telephone. In an ocean of terror, he was a tiny protected island.
This special treatment, it wasn't some quiet backroom deal. It was an official policy, and the Nazis even gave it a name. A bizarre, chilling name that reveals so much about the twisted psychology at the heart of this entire story.
They called him the Edeljude, the noble Jew. This term, it's so important. It's the key to understanding Hitler's incredible capacity for what we'd call cognitive dissonance. He could build an entire worldview, a genocidal ideology, on the idea of the Jew as this abstract, inhuman evil, while at the same time carving out one single, personal exception for a Jewish man who had been kind to him. Dr. Bloch became the good one, which somehow allowed the hatred for everyone else to remain perfectly intact. And make no mistake, this wasn't some local Gestapo chief making a friendly gesture. No way. The order came directly from the top. A priority message was sent from the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, from Hitler's central office, to the Gestapo in Linz. The message was unambiguous. Dr. Bloch and his family were to be considered off-limits. They were not to be touched. The Führer himself had commanded it. As the years went by and war broke out, Dr. Bloch knew that even with Hitler's protection, Austria wasn't safe. He and his wife decided to emigrate to America. And once again, Hitler intervened. Now, at a time when Jewish people trying to flee were being systematically robbed of every penny they had, Dr. Bloch's exit was facilitated. He wasn't allowed to take all his money, but he was allowed to leave with his family, his life, and his dignity. The promise had been kept, the debt was repaid. So Dr. Bloch made it to America in 1940. He was safe. But his unbelievable story has one final chapter. And it's this last piece of the puzzle that really forces us to confront the deepest, most disturbing questions of all. Once he was settled in New York, Dr. Bloch became a person of great interest to the U.S. government. The OSS, the organization that would later become the CIA, sought him out. I mean, you can imagine why. They thought, here is a man who knew Adolf Hitler intimately as a boy. Maybe he holds the key to understanding the psychology of our greatest enemy. So they interviewed him, hoping for some insight into what created the monster.
But what Dr. Bloch told them was not what they expected. He didn't describe a hateful, evil child. He remembered a quiet, well-mannered boy who was just completely broken by the death of his mother. His description, captured in the final OSS report, is chilling in how simple it is. He said, he was not a ruffian. He was simply a sad boy. That memory, coming from a Jewish man who owed his life to that same boy's protection, is just deeply unsettling. And that testimony really gets to the core truth of this whole affair. Hitler's anti-Semitism was not born from some abstract ignorance. This wasn't a man who had never really met a Jewish person. On the contrary, he had experienced profound, life-altering kindness from one. On the most personal level imaginable, he knew that Jewish people were human beings, capable of incredible compassion.
And that is the final dark takeaway here. The protection of Dr. Bloch isn't a mitigating factor. It's an indictment. It proves that Hitler had the capacity for gratitude, for recognizing humanity in a Jewish person. The fact that he could extend mercy to this one man proves that his decision to deny it to millions of others wasn't just an act of blind madness. It was a conscious, deliberate choice.
So we are left with this final haunting question. Does a monster's one exception, his one singular act of remembered decency, make his larger crimes any more comprehensible? Or does the very existence of that exception, the undeniable proof that he knew better, that he was capable of seeing the humanity he chose to extinguish, does that strip away any possible defense, making his crimes and his choices infinitely and eternally less forgivable?